Checking, 1, 2. All right, thank you. So glad you could all come today. My name, as Marion said, I'm Ann McGovern, and my routine is from the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, formerly from the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. Now I just mainly protect the environment in my yard, and it's a lot of fun, as I'm sure all of you are probably gardeners. Everybody raise your hand that likes to garden. Excellent. Yeah. Well, the best thing about composting is that it will make your plants thrive, survive drought, survive diseases, eliminate the need for fertilizer. And it's really a fun activity because it takes almost no work. And you end up every year with some nice compost you can just add to wherever you're planting, or as a top dressing around your perennial beds, or in potted plants. So you don't even really need a garden in order to use compost. So I have a bunch of slides I will show you, and I also brought some samples of soil and compost in various stages of disarray. And some worms, as Marion said. You can compost indoors if you don't want to go out in the winter, or if you just want to watch the process up close, or you just want to try something that's really fun, I think. Worm composting is really easy. I just went on vacation for 2 weeks, and all I did was throw in some paper for them, and they're fine. They can eat paper, they can eat food waste. They're very low maintenance pets. So that's the best part, because I like to spend whatever time I have and energy I have, I'd rather spend it gardening than composting, even though, or working on composting. You know, if I have a minute, I'll be weeding rather than tending the compost. So everything in my talk is geared towards making compost as easy as possible. And an indoor worm bin can be very easy. You just have to, it's a little bit like cooking, but it's a lot easier. And composting is a little bit like cooking, but again, a lot easier, because you don't really have to worry about how it tastes in the end. But there are a few ingredients you need to add, and water is a key ingredient. I noticed that there's a little compost bin out there on the side of the building. I was doing a little research recently to see what towns distribute compost bins that the state makes available at a low cost through a grant. And Sterling, through the Wachusett Earth Day organization, which you may know about, consists of 3 towns in the area, and they sell earth machines. And there's one out back outside this building. Did you know? No. Yeah. Well, it looks like it hasn't been used for a while, but but it has compost in it. It's just that it's dried out because the top of that compost bin is solid, and as the organisms that make the compost breathe, they tend to release moisture. So if you don't have rain going in, if the cover is solid, your compost will dry out and it'll turn into like cement. But it's like Betty Crocker, just add water and it will come back to it might take a while to absorb it, but if you guys want to play in the mud one day, one of your next meetings, you can go revive the compost out there in that earth machine and take compost, and then you can start again to use it. Because I looked, it's all decomposed. There's no like rotting garbage in there. So pretty cool. And if any of you want to get an earth machine compost bin, it's like a easy to assemble pre-made bin. Wachusett Earth Day sells them to Sterling residents and other residents of Wachusett. Do you know what towns? I've forgotten now which. There you go. 7 towns. You all know who you are, I hope. If not, ask her. And I'm not sure exactly where they sell them, wherever the recycling center is, and they're $25. So it's a great thing because not every town in Mass sells them. The towns pay $55 for them, and they sell them for $25 because of DEP's grant. So, what would you say? Well, it's because of, it's to make it easier for you and recycle as much as possible. So I'm just going to sit down while I show some slides. Some good reasons to compost are you can turn your food scraps into black gold, otherwise known as compost. You can reduce greenhouse gas emissions because when organic material decomposes aerobically, it releases carbon dioxide. But if it decomposes in a landfill, it releases methane, which is 7 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas. So you really want to avoid producing methane. And then once you convert your food scraps into compost, you get this material that adds nutrients, moisture, and carbon to the soil. So the carbon you produce actually gets retained in the soil, and that's actually a way of helping to retain carbon from going back into the environment. Carbon sequestration in the soil is a way you can fight climate change. Some of these things I've already talked about. What do you mean, the joys of composting? Well, you get the satisfaction of recycling your food scraps ecologically yourself. You don't have to send them off to some facility to be composted. You can do it in your own yard or woods or kitchen or on the porch. And you'll get great plant growth. You can use it for your potted plants, and you might get volunteers. I got a lemon tree sprout that sprouted from lemon seeds that I had brought back from California. And this is the little lemon tree that grew. And I knew it was from that lemon because those were the only lemons I had at the time. So I had a volunteer lemon tree, and I got 3 of them. I shared them with my siblings. So it was an unexpected treat. You also might find tomato plants growing where you use compost. The tomatoes love compost and they thrive. And if you have any seeds in there, they will sprout. And then you'll have free tomato plants. So as I was saying, composting is key for climate-wise gardening for several reasons. It helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and it helps store carbon in the soil as humus, supports plant growth, holds moisture in the soil during drought, which we are experiencing more and more often now because of climate change. And it recycles nutrients and organic matter for plants and soil life. And it improves soil structure by increasing the organic matter. If you have 5% organic matter in your soil, it'll be nice and loose and easy to work, as well as having nutrients in it. And once you get your soil to that 5%, you can just maintain it by mulching with your leaves or other organic material. Good soil structure, it helps your soil stay in place. It won't run off as quickly. The rainwater will be infiltrated rather than running off. And the good soil structure has pores in it, so oxygen, water, and nutrients are more accessible to your plant roots, and also to the little soil organisms that do a lot of beneficial work for your garden. And as I said, it's friable and easy to work, easy for plants to grow in. And you can actually compost in place. If you have a damp leaf layer in your yard somewhere, like up against a stone wall or something, just put gloves on and go dig under there, and you might find humus or compost underneath where the leaves are in contact with the soil. You'll see this beautiful black rich material, and that's basically naturally produced compost. So also, composting reduces the amount of waste requiring disposal, which may cost $125 a ton now for cities and towns. So for every pound or ton we compost at home, we save money for our towns. That's one of the reasons DEP provides a grant to help people to get that waste out of the waste stream. It saves money in the long run. It also saves if you were going to buy soil material or fertilizer, it will save you money that way. If you put your putrescible materials like banana peels and lemon rinds and orange peels into your compost instead of in your household trash, your trash won't smell because there will just be plastic in there. So it's kind of the opposite. We think compost stinks, but actually it helps with stink. It helps reduce stink in our house. It enables us to complete nature cycles of decomposition in our homes, yards, and gardens, and you can see that, and it's fun to watch and empowering, and it's free. It doesn't cost you anything. Mulch is a great way to help with the whole process of decomposition. It helps the soil hold moisture. It keeps the soil cool, which is real important when we have those heat waves. I use mulch more and more these days because I just see how the summers have been, and I don't like to water as little as I try to avoid watering as much as possible. So try to keep the soil, the moisture retained in the soil. And mulch helps reduce weeds. Another handy feature. This is some images of my garden, my back garden, shade garden, where I use leaves as mulch. And to my delight, the plants come right up through the leaves. And this time of year, it's like finding Easter eggs. You see, 2 weeks ago, it was just leaf litter, and it looked, well, I don't mind it, but some people do not like the appearance of leaf litter as a mulch. So if you shred them, they look better. But if we could all but now there's a movement to help pollinators by not shredding your leaves and leaving them on the ground. So there's even more reasons. So we just need to change our aesthetics a little bit to be a little more natural oriented. And it will decompose in place and build up your soil that way. Just some tips. Keep the mulch 3 inches away from tree trunks and plant stems so it won't cause decomposition there. Make your own mulch if possible. And you can use things that you would otherwise be throwing out, like you might send your leaves off to be composted at the town or somewhere else. And you can keep those in your yard and help your trees and other plants by recycling those leaves right into your yard. If you buy wood chip mulch, you might want to know that leaf mulch actually contains more nutrients than wood chips. It just has a more variety of constituents that actually make a better soil. And if the mulch dries out, which it probably will in August, when you go to water your plants, move the mulch aside so the water will get down into the soil, and then put the mulch back and it'll help hold it in. Try to keep the mulch about 2 to 3 inches deep during the growing season, and that'll give you all those benefits. She heard that it wasn't great to put a lot of citrus because the worms and other organisms don't like the acidity. And it's true if that was all it was in your pile, but if you have a leaf pile and you mix 10 pounds of citrus in with it like once a week, like I wouldn't dump 40 pounds in all at once because it's going to be hard to distribute it. But if you mix it into the leaves, and this is, if you've saved your leaves from last fall, the easiest way to compost actually is to make a leaf pile. Leaves take about a year to decompose, and food scraps take about anywhere from a month to 6 months, depending on what they are. Like corn cobs might take a year, but orange peels might take a couple months. Lettuce might take a month. So anyway, the softer things will decompose faster, but you want a ratio of about 3 parts brown to 1 part green. So and brown things are high in carbon, and that's what makes it not smell. It's kind of like a carbon filter. And green things are the food scraps or the citrus peels. So you only want about 25% food scraps and 75% brown material like leaves. Now, if you don't have leaves, you can use any of these other materials in this slide. These are all browns. Browns is shorthand for high in carbon. So that could include straw, salt marsh hay, shredded paper and cardboard, like newspaper, paper towels, paper plates, paper bags. That all makes fine material for absorbing and helping reduce odors in your compost pile. Chip brush, sawdust, pine needles, and we recommend not to put more than 10% of the total material in your pile as pine needles because they take forever to decompose because they have a real tough needle and a cuticle, whatever, wax and whatnot that's resistant to decay. So they make great mulch if you have pine needles. Use them around your pine trees. That, it's all flexible. If you have more than 10%, it'll just take longer to decompose. And then, so anything from that category, if you don't have leaves, just try to remember you want 3 times as much of that brown stuff as green stuff. And the green stuff is generally your kitchen scraps, anything that's vegetative, grass clippings, weeds. Try to get the weeds before they go to seed or even before they flower, and then they won't come back and repeat over and over. Vegetable and fruit scraps, you can use seaweed, eggshells, coffee grounds, filters, tea bags, manure from herbivores like horses, cows, rabbits, chickens, goats, gerbils. All that is great material for your compost. And then you can either mix that together or you can layer it depending on it doesn't really matter which way you do it. You just want to always end up with a brown layer on top to act as a filter for the stuff that might smell underneath. Like the food scraps, the manure, the vegetables, the grass clippings, those will generate nitrogen and ammonia that will smell really kind of gross. So you want to mix them in with the leaves and then cover the leaves over the top. If you do get odors, a handy dandy trick is soil is a really great filter. Just sprinkle a few shovelfuls of soil on top of your compost pile, and whatever's in there it'll tamp down the odors, and then it can just compost the rest of the way in peace, hopefully, not disturb the neighbors. And then just keep it damp and aerated, and you can either build air piles into it or turn it. You don't have to turn it. You can just use a system that's naturally aerated, like putting coarse material at the bottom. And then keep it damp. That's real important. It needs to be damp. I'm going to, in fact, pass a sample around to illustrate. This is my before sample. These are oak leaves. I have a lot of oak leaves in my yard. Has anybody tried composting oak leaves? Oh, God. You shred them. Yeah, shredding really helps. So this is, you want to pass this around? This is the before sample of mostly oak leaves. A lot of times people tell me that oak leaves won't decompose. But as you know, eventually they do. But the trick is to keep them damp. So here's some oak leaves from my compost pile from last year. And you can see at the bottom is where they were damp. And I left a few dry ones on the top for you to see the difference. These are the same age leaves, but the moisture made them decompose. So those leaves are 6 months old. And then these leaves are from the fall before. So those are a little more than a year old. And without any real effort, those just decomposed on their own. So moisture is key. And while I'm at it, I'm going to pass around, this is some finished compost. That's what your compost will look and smell like after about a year. I give it about a year to compost. If you're in a big rush, you can speed it up by turning it more often. But if you don't mind just being on nature's cycle, you can just let it go for a year. And by the end of that time, you'll have nice compost like that you can use. And that's worm compost, so you can see what that looks like. It's a little more like clay. It's kind of sticky. And then this is you can use your compost to make potting soil by mixing equal parts compost, sand, and a commercial potting mix. And the compost will add the nutrients and help hold moisture, and the sand will allow drainage, and so will the commercial compost mix. She asked about onion skins and garlic. She heard not to because of the worms. And that's kind of the same thing with everything. Is like the more of a mix of stuff you have, you can pretty much compost anything. The trouble with onion skins and garlic in my situation, if I compost them I keep this worm bin in my kitchen actually on the floor next to my recycling bag. So it's all there together, but they smell bad. But that's the only problem. So just compost them outside. But no, there's no problem with the worms. But I've read the same thing. Also, pineapples, I've heard, are acidic, and the enzymes will eat up the worms. So it's not recommended to put pineapples in a worm bin. But outdoors, it would be okay because the worms could leave if they didn't like it. So when they're trapped in a bin, then you have to be a little more careful. I killed off a worm bin once by putting coffee grounds. We tried this at the office because our office was downtown and we wanted to be able to practice what we preach. So I started a worm bin in the office, and at one point I was just putting coffee grounds in there, and the worms all died. So, you can't put too much of a good thing. That's exactly. She asked if you have to have some type of manure for it to work. No, you don't. That's an optional thing. Great question. She asked about wood ash from the wood stove. Think of that as salt and pepper, seasoning. Don't dump in 6 inches of it, but you can sprinkle it in with your compost and it should be fine. It will raise the pH. So if you use too much of it, it might raise the pH like more than you more than the organisms like. So use it sparingly. Also, if you have acidic soil in your lawn, for instance, and you wanted to raise the pH, you could sprinkle your wood ash directly on the lawn, and it'll act like lime, but it also adds nutrients. How do you maintain your compost pile in the winter? You want it to be basically to maintain the heat of the composting process. You want to have 1 cubic yard of a volume, which is about 3 by 3 by 3. And if you go into the fall, as I was saying, but I think I forgot to complete my thought here, the easiest way to make a compost pile is to make a leaf pile. And if you can make it 3 by 3 by 3, it'll hold in the heat it generates, and that'll help speed up the decomposition. Make sure the leaves are damp. And I also recommend sprinkling a little soil every 12 inches or so of fresh material, and that adds your soil organisms, which are the workforce, are all these invisible creatures. Some are visible, but many are invisible. They do the work for you. So they live in the soil as well as in compost piles or manure piles. So if you sprinkle a shovelful of soil into your fresh leaf material, it'll add a whole new workforce of decomposers. So you don't need a lot, even just a couple handfuls will help. Make sure it's nice and damp. You want it to be about 50% moisture, which means that when you stir it, the leaves don't rustle. They should just be sort of thwump, thwump. So if you hear your leaves rustling, add water. And then once you have that leaf pile made, you bury your food scraps into the leaves whenever you have them available. And that way you'll always have 3 times as much browns as greens. So in the winter, build up your pile. You'll probably have a lot of leaves that you can use, and just make your pile, big enough. And then to meet that, 27 cubic feet size, 3 by 3 by 3, and it'll compost fine through the winter. The compost bin out there is a little smaller than that, so it might freeze. And if it freezes, no problem. Just it'll continue to decompose when it thaws. So you don't have to worry about it really. If it freezes, it'll just kick back in when the weather warms up. And you can keep adding your food scraps, and if they freeze, then they won't attract ants, they won't smell. So then just in the spring, mix them in. So you don't have to sweat it in the winter. I don't, just. Oh, she said, will the worms die in the winter? They probably will survive at the bottom of the pile. If you have a big pile, they will go down where they're insulated. I had worms survive through the winter that were on asphalt underneath some paper bags of leaves. So there was just enough moisture insulation where they could survive through the winter. So they're a lot tougher than we think. Most of the worms we have here in Massachusetts are not native. They're European, but pardon? Oh, and the jumping worms, which they're basically a bigger version. They just do more. They do more. They work in the summer. They're a little creepy when you see them, but unless you're running a golf course, you don't really have to worry about them. They don't. They're not going to hurt anything. They're just going to make more humus faster. Jumping worms, she mentioned, those are I think they're from Asia, and they're here now. And just look at the bright side. They help aerate your soil. And the European worms, the red wigglers and the night crawlers, those are all European. So they're all really, I wouldn't call them invaders, but they're exotic. And but they've naturalized. So I think that's a good thing. So you don't have to worry about them dying off. The only thing that'll really kill them is if they dry out or if they don't have any food. So if you have really sandy soil, you probably won't have earthworms because there's just nothing in there for them to eat. But if you have a compost pile, chances are good there will be worms into it that you don't even have to add. They will just find it, build it, and they will come. And just keep feeding them and give them a damp environment. You don't want it to, good question. You have to regulate the temperature if you have an indoor bin. They like it between 40 degrees and 80 degrees. So you can put them in the basement. That it might get chilly down there and they'll kind of slow down, but they won't die. So as long as they're above freezing and below 80, they'll be fine. If you have an indoor porch, that you can sort of put your worm bin up against the house where it'll get more warmth, and maybe put something around it to insulate it. It should be fine. And if they die, you'll probably have some survive, but if they die, you can just start over. I hate to say it, but they do sometimes die. They're easy to replenish, and then you start again. So, and they also regulate their own population, so you don't have to worry about you don't have to worry about controlling the population. They'll just only grow to the size of your container. I want to let you know where you can get materials. There's some out in the back there, but if you want to get more materials about composting, you can just go to mass.gov, the state website, and type home composting into the search box, and you will find a plethora of materials on there that you can read at your leisure. I think we pretty much covered this. What can be composted includes anything that was once alive. That includes food waste, paper products, because it came from a tree, yard waste, manure, seaweed. But what materials you choose to compost depends on what system you're using. This is just showing how much compostable material is in the Massachusetts waste stream. It's about 33%. So if you get your food scraps and yard waste out of your into your compost pile, it won't be going in the trash, and it will be really helping the environment of the entire state. So there's many different ways to compost. We talked a little bit about using a pre-made bin. You can also make your own bin. You can also use just a pile. You can use a bucket or a worm bin. Cities and towns have windrows usually, which are big long piles, and same with farms. Commercial systems use enclosed containers to keep in the odors and control it better. And if it's an aerobic system, it produces carbon dioxide and humus at the end. And if it's an anaerobic system, which means without oxygen, it'll produce methane instead of carbon dioxide. And that actually goes on in our own stomachs. So we are all intimately acquainted with anaerobic digestion. So what we're talking about today is on-site composting, rather than putting your material out at the curb for someone else to pick up to compost. So both are good, but if you do it yourself, then you can control what goes in and you can use what comes out. Everyone can compost. It can be done at home, at school, at work, at play, on a farm, in the basement, on a porch, in the woods, or directly in the garden. So you can tailor a system that works best for you. So in a home system, we recommend only vegetative food scraps. Don't put in meat or dairy products. Compost and yard waste. Try to keep the weed seeds out. Compostable paper. That includes waxed paper, but you have to watch out because sometimes paper looks like waxed paper, but it's actually plastic coated, and you'll get a plastic film in your compost. So just try to stick with plain paper. Corrugated cardboard can be composted, and as I said, the animal manure embedding. So it's the majority of our organic waste can be composted at home. On the right, these are things we recommend you don't add, and this is for best results and to keep away odors and pests. Like bears. Yeah, if you have bears, you might just want to compost yard waste and leave the food waste for a worm bin indoors. And that's probably a topic for Marion. So I'm sure she has a lot of tips about that. But so bears, raccoons, rats, all these things will be attracted to meat products and things that smell really strong, like peanut butter is used to trap rodents. So we try to recommend you don't put peanut butter in your compost pile because you might attract rodents. Dairy products can smell rancid. Cooked foods with sauces will decompose, but if they smell too good, they might attract dogs and coyotes and so forth. Dog and cat manure, it may contain pathogens and parasites that can infect humans. So we don't recommend you put that in your compost pile. You can bury it in your yard somewhere where you're not going to be digging it up later. And that's one way to handle it, but we don't recommend composting it Along those lines, you should always wash your hands after you handle compost or soil, as you probably already do. Know that, but just to repeat. Diseased plants, if you know you have a plant that has diseases on it, it's better not to compost it. You can put it in the trash. It's allowed. Weeds that have gone to seed, the same thing. If you have weeds that you went on vacation, you came back, you have a lot of weeds that you don't want to spread, then you can put those in your trash. And weeds that spread by roots and runners, different kinds of vines, each piece can make a new plant, so you don't want to put that in. Yeah, she said she buries her noxious weeds in a hole in the ground so that they will decompose and build the soil up, but she won't be using it to garden with. So that's a great suggestion. And then do you cover it up or do you just let it throw some leaves on it? That's perfect. I love that. That is a good suggestion. Okay, so the compost workers, we have outdoor compost critters and we have indoor compost critters. Would you like to meet the compost critters? They all don't like light. I think it's because they know they will be eaten if they can be seen. So I'm going to dig, so I keep the cover on here. This is some material from a compost pile that might have sow bugs and other little creatures that do the work. And you might need to dig around to find some. I can see some roots and stuff in there. Probably dry it out a little bit. And then I'll pass around some of the indoor composters, which are, it's funny, it's not just worms in a worm bin. There's a whole ecosystem of soil organisms in here. But by using paper, I'm going to just tilt this down over so you can see what this worm bin looks like. You're going to see it basically looks like a pile of paper. Instead of using leaves, I use paper indoors so I don't get as big of an assortment of critters, mainly the bacteria and the worms. And I keep it covered with paper, and that acts as a carbon filter, so it keeps any odors from getting too strong. So here you will see a little of the variety of things I add to my worm bin. And it's really cute because they, let me see this fork. I want to make sure I get some worms in here. They do this work, and they are just the most innocuous little creatures. You might think that worms are disgusting, in which case, you don't have to look at these creatures. If you don't want to, it's optional. Yes, if you have worms in your own garden, you can dig up a few and they will multiply. And they don't really have to be a particular kind, but these ones you'll see here are called red wigglers, and they live at the surface. So those are the ones you might find at the surface. Those are the surface dwellers are happiest in a little container like this. If you dig up night crawlers, they usually go down as far as 6 feet down into the soil. So they will not be happy in this. They'll probably jump out and try to climb farther. So actually I'm exaggerating. They probably won't, but the philosophy of adding lime to accelerate decomposition, lime is really, I think, used to control odors for like big manure piles. Yeah, and pH, it raises the pH. So it's generally safest not to add lime because you can overdo it without even knowing it. So it's just fine to not use it. A lot of times farmers use it because they have big manure piles, so that will help control the odors on a farm. She asked if there's certain materials or plants or leaves you can use to help your compost break down, like comfrey leaves. And I believe comfrey is an ingredient that's used in some organic composting practices. Yes, comfrey is a good one. Also, maple leaves have the right amount of carbon and nitrogen naturally. They will decompose easily. Horse manure tends to be a good ingredient to help things break down faster. You just have to watch out that you don't get weed seeds in with it, which can be a problem with horse manure. Cow manure doesn't tend to have as much weed seeds. She asked about biodegradable plastic bags and other materials. I have buried so many biodegradable things in my worm bin. I figure in a worm bin, if something's biodegradable, it's going to decompose in a worm bin. And I find them years later. So it just, I haven't had great experience with them decomposing. And then a lot of times too, they're made with a proprietary method. There is a type of material that's biologically created from bacteria, but it's super expensive. And a lot of it is just they infiltrate plastics with cornstarch or other materials. So you're not really sure that it's going to completely decompose or if it's just going to break apart into microplastics. So I tend to try to stay away from plastics, biodegradable plastic. And even now there's, with the PFAS, the forever chemicals, they're being found on things like pizza boxes and wax paper. So it's really hard to know what is safe. But in a compost pile, a lot of it will just get diluted and you shouldn't have to worry about it. There's probably more junk in our food than there is in our compost, I hate to say. All right, let's see now. For a compost system, as I was saying, if you're going to compost food scraps, it's best if you use an enclosed system. We recommend an enclosed system if you're composting food waste to help animals from getting in there. To be really rodent-proof, it needs to be made of metal and have a secure floor and cover and openings less than a ½ inch. And that would keep rodents out. And that's called hardware cloth. If you want to go to the hardware store and make a rodent-proof container for your compost, get ½ inch hardware cloth. You can either make it into a square or a circle and then cover it with the same material, and animals won't be able to get in there, except maybe bears. That's a different creature. The volume, as I was saying, if it's 1 cubic yard or 27 cubic feet, that's the optimal size for efficient hot composting. But you can also compost in something as small as a 5-gallon bucket or a container like this. It won't heat up, but it'll still decompose. So it's a very flexible system. A lot of people think their compost has to get hot in order to be successful. And it doesn't. It comes out just as well if it doesn't heat up and composts at cooler temperatures. You might kill off some more weed seeds with the hot composting, but you can just avoid that by keeping the weed seeds out. And you can build in aeration. You can put some corn stalks on the bottom of your pile to allow air spaces at the bottom, and then put some sticks every so often, and that way you don't have to turn it. Or if you get a compost bin that has built-in aeration, like the one out there, that you don't really need to turn it. Try to make it easy to use for whoever will be using it, either yourself or kids. And if you don't have a yard, you can do it indoors or on a deck or a porch. If you want to find out where to get a subsidized compost bin in Massachusetts, you can go to that mass.gov and search on home composting, and you'll come up with this list. So if you don't live in any of the towns that sell them through Wachusett, you can look them up and find out if your town sells them. Here's what the list looks like. About 150 towns do distribute these compost bins, so it's great. These are the bins that are available. This is the New Age composter, and it has a big capacity. So if you can get a hold of one of these, it's convenient for the size, and it has a floor and cover that allow aeration and moisture to get in. So I've had great success with this bin. The Earth Machine is the other one. This is the one that's out back here. The trick with this one is to make sure you take the cover off when it's raining so it doesn't just dry out. They also have tumblers if you want it to be completely enclosed. I already talked about how to make compost. Basically, you want 3 times as much carbon as nitrogen. You want about 50% moisture. You want air to be able to get in there and a sufficient mass to maintain the heat. And optional ingredients are to add additional bacteria, and you can do that for free by adding soil or manure or compost makes a good inoculant, or you can buy an inoculant, but I usually just use the ones that are free. It's like sourdough, exactly, exactly. And lime is optional, but as I said, you have to be careful not to raise the pH too much. And I talked about these already. Don't put meat and dairy in there. Don't compost toxic materials, trash. Try to exclude diseased plants and weeds that have gone to seed and invasive plants. This is a list of things that you can compost. Any questions on what you can or can't compost? Yeah, paper towels are fine. Yeah.
But it's treated.
Well, it's not enough treatment to count. It won't matter. If they have a little, I mean, you have to assume if they're using ink on the printed ones that it has to be food grade ink because you're using it in the kitchen. So it's, I use ones that aren't dyed and I try to use ones that aren't bleached, but it doesn't matter because it'll be dissolved so much. The colors are fine too. Even colored newspaper is not considered to be a problem. I try to stay away from parchment paper because I really don't know what's in it and I'm just not confident about what it might do. She said if you put a paper towel in the bottom of your food scrap container, it makes it easy to dump it and keeps it cleaner. Great suggestion. Also, you can do that with paper bags if you have them. Eggshells, if you crush them up, they'll compost faster. They don't really compost because they're minerals. They just kind of eventually break apart. And you might have eggshells in your finished compost, but they won't do any harm. Yeah, and it's good for the worms. It gives them grit. And I think it's good for your plants because it gives them minerals like calcium. So just break them up. And if you're worried about getting bacteria from crushing an eggshell with your hand, you can put them in a Ziploc bag and crush them up that way. And then you won't see, if you don't want to see the eggshells in your garden, crush them up small. As I said, 3 parts brown to 1 part green is your optimal ratio for fast decomposition. And as I said in the beginning, fill your bin or make your pile 3/4 full of leaves and then bury your food scraps under it. Keep everything damp, aerate it either passively or actively, and it will compost it within about 6 months. We did composting at Marshfield Fair for many years until I retired. And we composted a lot of material. This is a new age composter. We had 3 of them, and we composted about 500 pounds of material in each bin, about 1,500 over the course of the year. Another thing, as you talked about putting a paper towel in the bottom of your food waste bucket, you can also use a paper bag the same way. Like say you're husking corn, you can husk it into a big paper bag and then dump the whole thing into your compost. I find it helps to rip up the paper because otherwise it just kind of lumps together. And then make sure it's damp. And here's a picture of like a stainless steel food waste bucket lined with a paper bag. It makes it easier to clean. You want about 50% moisture. If it gets too dry, your compost will just sit there and nothing will happen. So the food scraps are usually wet, but it's usually the leaves that dry out. So if your pile does get too wet, it'll clog up the air spaces, and that's not good either. So if it's too wet, you can just add some dry material like leaves or paper towels. And if it's too dry, you just water it either with your garden hose or rain or snow. I do recommend that you put your compost pile where you can reach it with your hose. So if it does dry out, you can water it. So where should you put your bins? Where determine how much space you'll need and make it easy, make it convenient. Don't put it way far away or you might just not ever use it. Make it close to a water source, a faucet, not wetlands. And your appearance of it, you could either disguise it or just somehow put it in an out of the way location where it won't cause a aesthetic eyesore for you or the neighbors. A lot of times people put their compost pile right under their neighbors' windows, so that's not the best location. Yeah. Drainage, you don't want to put it in a wet area. Exposure. It can actually either be in the sun or the shade. Whichever you have will work. If it's in the sun, it'll get more warmth, but it'll tend to dry out faster. So you'll need to add water more. If it's in the shade, it won't stay as warm, but it won't dry out as fast. But either way will work because the heat really comes from within. So you don't need the sun to warm it up. So another idea is to put it close to the gardens or where you'll be using the compost. And try to avoid problems with your neighbors or your spouse. Yeah, that's great. I don't know if you heard, it's called trench composting. You can dig a trench and bury your food scraps in it in the fall, or really year round, I think, and then bury it, and then the next season that'll be your garden bed. And then you can rotate where you dig your trench. Yeah, clever and easy. Some tools you might want to have available would be a hoe to stir the pile, a cultivator to bury your food scraps, a shovel and a trowel to get your compost out, and a wheelbarrow and gloves. And I get my compost out by pushing aside the leaves on top and digging down to where it looks like soil, and then pulling that out and putting it in my wheelbarrow. And in about a half hour, I have got my wheelbarrow full and half my bin is empty. And then I switch sides, use the compost. And then if I don't get it all out, I just let it sit because the older it gets, the more refined it becomes. So as long as you can get it when you want it, that's great. So you can use your compost for planting seedlings. It's not recommended to use straight compost because it holds moisture so well. But if the leaves aren't completely broken down, it seems to work fine. So I cheat. I do it because it seems so rich. And if you see things sprouting in your compost pile, then you know it will support germination. So it's safe to use. I add it to potted plants. I've had this rose bush for about 12 years, and I put compost in the top, and I bring it indoors in the winter and then out in the spring, and it still blooms. This is how I have my worm bin in the house, that very one. I just put it in a corner out of the way. Well, it's like my little trash and recycling station. To make a worm bin, you can take a container like that and drill holes in the sides and top. The sides, I leave the top solid actually, but just so you can see, there's holes about every 3 inches on the sides, and I leave the bottom solid because I don't want to have to use a drip tray. If you leave the bottom solid, you have to make sure it doesn't get too wet. And if it gets too wet, just add some more paper, dried paper, and it will absorb it. So it's just sort of a balancing act that you have to kind of use your judgment. Red wigglers, you can get them from a vendor or collect them in the wild. Look where leaves have overwintered on the soil and dig down, and you're likely to find a couple of red wigglers. Here they are on the bottom of an oak leaf. And then you can put them in your worm bin and they'll multiply. Or you can go to your friend over here. She's got 2 containers. And also, I'm happy to share worms with you today. If anybody wants to take some home today, I'll give you some in a plastic bag, and they can live in the bag for a week or 2. So if you're not ready yet, you can, you can leave them there until you make your bin. You might need to get a container. Yeah, she asked if red wigglers stay that small. They do. They start out about 1/4 of an inch, real small, and they get to about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. So they're small little guys. And I just use the same procedure. I fill the worm bin up with damp paper, and then I bury the food scraps. I dig a little hole, bury the food scraps under the paper, and then cover it back up. And that's the way it won't create odors. If you do get odors and if you get fruit flies, you can there's a couple things to do. First of all, stop adding food waste until the fruit flies are gone. And then you can make a fruit fly trap. Fruit flies tend to come in on banana peels, I find. The fruit flies often lay their eggs on the bananas in the tropics, and then in our kitchens they hatch. So even if you don't have a worm bin, you can easily get fruit flies, especially grape season. You might get them, and cantaloupe season, and all that sweet smelling fruit can end up with fruit flies. So you can just take a plastic container, put a ½ inch of either red wine or red wine vinegar in there, and then into the cover you punch holes that are about 1/4 inch in diameter, and then put that on. Put any food scraps, any fruit, put it in the refrigerator so it won't continue to germinate. Like if you have bananas in the house, get rid of them, put them in the fridge or eat them, and then put the banana peels. What I do, I put banana peels either in my outdoor compost bin or directly around our roses, because you probably know they have potassium and they're good for flowers. So you can put banana peels out directly. So anyway, get rid of your fruit and close your worm bin, add more paper, because there just might be too much fruit in there. So add more paper, and then put your fruit fly trap nearby, but not inside your worm bin. And the fruit flies will be attracted to the red wine or the red wine vinegar. You can even use a banana peel as bait. And they'll go in through the holes, and every day you take this outside and empty it, and you will move all your fruit flies outdoors in about 2 weeks. So it takes a little while, but it's just don't add any more food waste to your worm bin until they're all gone. They do come and go. I don't have any now, so when I share my worms with you, I will not be sharing fruit fly larvae with you. So, if you get them, don't feel like a failure. Just stop adding food waste. This is really like a compost bin miniature. So instead of like buckets of food waste, it can handle about a handful a day or one of these a week. So it's small scale. So just remember that. It's not, if you overload it and you start to smell it, then back off on the food scraps, add more paper scraps. But it's really convenient for, if you do use paper towels, you can't overdo it with the paper. So you can, use it as a trash can for paper towels, or like paper towel rolls, or brown paper bags, or if you have one of these, fruit basket things that's made out of pressed paper. It's like a trash can, and you just keep adding paper, and it will keep breaking down and prevent the odors from forming. So that's my trick. Thank you. That's a great reminder. If you freeze your fruit scraps or food scraps first, it'll kill off any fruit fly eggs. Yeah, she asked if you have like a rotating drum of a compost system, would you add worms? Yeah, they will help. That will become a worm bin. And if they die in the winter, then just redo it in the spring, add more in the spring. She asked if diatomaceous earth, or what was the other? Seven dust? Seven, is that a herbicide? A pesticide? Yeah, I think 7 would be, and diatomaceous earth would be an irritant to them. They wouldn't like it. But if you have it on the surface of your garden for slugs, is that what you use it for, slug control? Yeah, they'll be underneath. So the worms will be underneath, so that's fine. The 7, I wouldn't recommend. That's actually the end of my slides. I just have a picture of a bee on a peach tree flower. So hopefully you will have that kind of success. And